I want to become a VTuber. Hey, hello. So I don't want to waste your time, so I'm going to be upfront about what this video is. This video is not an in-depth guide about how to draw and rig a VTuber model. There are far more talented artists and riggers who are much better at showing you how to do all of that stuff. I'll even link the ones I used in the description. However, I still think this video is worth your time, because over the next couple of videos, I will be going over my own drawing, preparation, and rigging process, and some of the pitfalls and difficulties that I experienced as a first-time VTuber artist and rigger, some of the things I found most challenging and how to overcome them. Sometimes pros at this kind of thing can overlook things that they think are straightforward, and then first-timers like us can get stuck. Also, my own learning style is more hands-on first, tutorial later, so I learned some lessons the hard way, as well as tried some things that may have not been technically correct as the right way of doing things, but they did kind of work in some specific ways for me. So if you find any of the things I talk about here useful, I'd appreciate if you'd leave a like, and if you're interested in any of my other projects, subscribe to stay notified. So that's enough qualifying statements, let's jump right into the first part of this, which is VTuber model drawing. Let's start at the end first. So say hello to my VTuber models. I have two of them. This one is the second one that I rigged, my human model. This one took the most time and also has the most issues. Check out this head rotation, it's pretty jank. The body doesn't really react to anything, and there are a bunch of other minor issues with it, like its blush. Look at it. See how when it gets too strong it doesn't blend with the rest of the face skin color? But it's mine and I made it myself, so I love it, jank and all. Now here's my first model that I made. This is my blob model. My name is Blobbit, after all. This one is much simpler in every way. It's got a variety of cute, exaggerated expressions, and it was so much simpler to rig. See, when I rotate my head, I don't really care if the cheeks or other features overlap with the outline of the body or anything like that. I covered the design of these models in a previous video, so if you're interested in that process, you can check out this video. But now onto the drawing with rigging in mind. Now, just in case you have no idea what drawing with rigging in mind is, or what rigging is, I'm not talking about rigging as in rigging a sports match. Rigging in the context of VTuber model creation is the process in which you preset positions for a model to be based on input parameters. For example, the parameter IL open is linked to how open your left eye is, 0 being closed and 1 being open. Next video we're going to get into much more detail on my rigging process, so I'll leave it at that for now, but the point of that little explanation is to explain what drawing with rigging in mind is. It's to draw your model in a way that means it's easily manipulated during the rigging process. If you don't draw a model to be easily manipulated when rigging, you're going to be in for a world of hurt, which I'm definitely going to talk about when I failed to do this myself and suffered for several hours on stream failing to get my mouth working. Next video, I swear. But the way to reduce the chance of making a mistake during your drawing process is to make it simple. This is the whole reason I started off with my little blobby boy. He's nice and simple. Less details means less things to stuff up. And when I say things to stuff up, I'm talking about layers. All the different parts of an image that make it up. The more complex of a movement that you want to have, generally speaking, the more layers you'll need. If you want strands of hair to move independently, then those different strands of hair need to be drawn as different layers. Let me break it down this way. My human model has over 80 layers in it, over a dozen for a single eye, and that's probably lower than professional models. My blob model has significantly less than that, at only 28 in total, less than half, a much easier prospect. When drawing for a model to be rigged though, you draw things a little differently. Let's say I'm drawing an image. If I'm putting hair on a separate layer, or even different layers for different parts of the hair, I'm not too concerned about what happens at the edges of the hair or what happens behind it. It's a static image after all, you don't need to worry about what you can't see. When rigging, you have to overdraw your layers. If you intend to separate a strand of hair, you better make sure that an image is completed behind it. Otherwise, when it starts moving, there's going to be these nasty gaps. Same with body parts that you might not think about. My human model's ears, for example, are actually fully drawn. That way, during head rotation, I'm able to move them into view. Same with the neck, it's drawn so that it extends well past my chin, so that when I tilt my head, it doesn't separate from the rest of my body. Another potential cause of gaps is not having solid layers. What I mean by that is, if you draw like me, you often have your line art and colors on separate layers. Don't do this when drawing for a model, you don't want to learn that the hard way. Skipping forward to rigging to explain, when you want to manipulate your layers when rigging, you give them meshes. Meshes are, well, they're this thing. Each point on a mesh controls the area around it, which is how you create movement. Now, there are different ways to manipulate meshes, which I'm not going to get into right now, but that's the absolute basic of the basics of it. If you have your color and line art layers separated, that first means that, number one, you're going to have to create two meshes, and creating meshes is the most time-consuming and difficult part of rigging, so you don't want to do that. But number two, it also increases the likelihood that your meshes won't match up, so you'll have to be extra careful when manipulating your color mesh so that it always meets up with the line art. This may be fine for your plotted keyforms for a parameter. These are terms that I'll also explain during the rigging video, but unless you're keyforming every individual point of a parameter, the automatic tweening, to use an animation term, of the color layer won't always meet the edges of your line art. So just combine them, it's much easier and simpler. Break down your layers into the largest moving parts you can for both line art and color layers, and only separate them if they need to move separately. What if you need to move things independently? Or you want to keep something static while the line art moves? Well, in that case, you can draw overflow. I'm sure there's a technical artist term for it, I'm neither technical or an artist really, but drawing overflow for me is drawing the layer outside of your line art layer. Thankfully, Live2D, the program I use for rigging and you'll likely use as well, allows you to clip layers to other layers. So if you clip an overflow layer to your line art layer, it won't appear outside of it. This is what I use for my blobby reflections, they actually extend past the outline. I also use it for stuff like my purple haze emotion thing, it's actually a bit larger than the face. This is where the drawing process for the blob model would stop and where I made my first mistake. You see, there's another very important part of drawing for model rigging that I hadn't figured out yet. Well, two actually, but they're hand in hand. Drawing hidden layers and drawing covering layers. Hidden layers are exactly that, layers that are either partially or completely hidden from view by default. This isn't due to opacity either. Hidden layers aren't transparent at all in that regard. The reason you can't see them is due to the covering layers. Because I didn't utilize these types of layers in my blob drawing, I'll refer to my human model for this example. My human model's mouth consists of 12 layers. 4 I would call basic details, the mouth lines, the lips. 6 that are hidden layers, 4 for the teeth, 1 for the tongue, and 1 for the dark, endless void of mouth. And the final 2 layers are the covering layers, which act as the top mouth and bottom mouth skin respectively. Keep this in mind because this is called foreshadowing. Now that you have a basic understanding of the different types of layers and requirements of them, I'll finally get into the process of drawing the blob with the intention to rig it. My very first attempt had even less layers than the 28 layers that the blob model ended up with, at 22, and that's mainly due to a couple of things. The main body was just 2 main layers, I split it up further in later models for some better motion, and I had less emotions and reactions on the old model, just the tears and the haze, but in my second go round I included a question mark, exclamation mark, and anger mark. Due to the simplicity of the shape, and not requiring very many details, my breakdowns of my layers are as such. The 3 little side blobs, all fully drawn even though half of them are obscured by the main body. The 2 parts that make up my little blobby B-shaped hair thing, I wanted them to wobble independently. The main body, 1 layer for the solid shape and outline including the dark green shadow and reflection outline, and then a second layer for the rest of the shiny reflection. There was also a layer for the blush. The mouth is where things get a bit messy because I didn't follow tutorials properly. I didn't create my blob mouth properly, so I had an open frown layer, upper frown, so upper lip frown, lower lip, open mouth, and upper lip. Knowing what I know now, this is really dumb. Having 2 types of open mouths and even upper lips is silly. Not unless you're doing some advanced wizardry that I can assure you I was not. Also, take note that unlike my human model, I don't have any covering layers either. What I'm trying to stress is, yes, I'm taking you through my learning process, and that includes mistakes. Do not make a mouth like this. Alright, moving on. Finally, each individual blob eye consisted of 3 parts: the outline, the dark void, and the sparkle, and 4 if you include the tears of each eye. This was also kind of a mistake, but far less of one than my human model eye, though due to the simplicity of the blob model eyes, it didn't bite me as hard. I mean, there's a reason that my human model eye has 4 times as many layers to it. The final layer was the fuzzy purple layer, which was just a flat purple layer with some blurring on the edges. Simple stuff. Once I was satisfied, the next important thing to do is to export it, right? Wrong. Before you export it, name each and every layer. No, you don't have to, but if you don't, you're going to make things so much harder for yourself. Another tip is to name things from the perspective of the image. That means while the eye from your perspective is the left eye, when you rig it, that eye should be connected to the right eye's variables. So in order to not confuse yourself later, it's easier to name those things like eye right or ear right, and so on. Additionally, I flattened out my layer structure. Often when I draw, I make groups of layers for different features, but for the final version that I was going to export for Live 2D, I removed all of the different groups and just had all the layers on the top level. Once I was done with the first model, the layers looked like this, and the model image looked like this. Yeah, it looks a bit wonky having all the layers visible at once, but no big deal. Finally, you're ready to export. If you want to get your layers into Live 2D, what you need to do is to have everything saved as a Photoshop file, a PSD. That doesn't mean you need Photoshop though. What I use for drawing is a program called Krita, and it's completely free. As an added bonus, it has the ability to save files as PSD files, and when I imported them into Live 2D, they worked perfectly fine, thank goodness. So yeah, I've got my blob model from a drawn image into something ready to be imported and worked on in Live 2D. What's next? Well, I'm on holidays right now actually, so I'm going to leave it off here. I haven't got that much time to pump out a long video before my deadline due to Christmas and all of that stuff. But next video I'll talk about rigging the blob, and what I ended up changing to rectify some mistakes, mainly to do with the mouth. The mouth is always so difficult. So if you want to catch that, you better subscribe and ring the bell. I'm literally working on these videos week to week, so if there's an aspect you want me to cover for the next video, let me know because I'll definitely see it in the comments. I guess I'll do a part 3 on the process of creating and rigging the human, but I'll leave that one with a bit more of a gap. I'm still trying to figure out the head rotation situation, and if I manage to resolve what I was doing wrong, I'd like to make sure you all know as well. Either way, I'll leave it off here and I'll see you next time, since it's not I attempt new things, it's we attempt new things. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a fruitful day.